Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today's no exception. We have an amazing guest. We have Mr. George Ross. George is most known for his role as Mr. Trump's right-hand man for much of 37 years. He's the author of 2 best-selling books on real estate and negotiation. He taught at the law school at NYU for over 20 years. George is 92 years of age, and he carries with him the wisdom of the ages. Before he worked for Donald, he worked for Saul Goldman in New York City, and he did personally 702 transactions for Goldman and DiLorenzo. He's worked for the Wilpons family, who owned the New York Mets. I love the wisdom that George brings to the table, and today we're talking about interest rates and the news from the Federal Reserve this week. Listen to our conversation.
Hello.
Good evening, George.
Hi there.
Well, welcome from northern France.
Is that where you are?
Yes, a little bit late in the evening.
Okay. You're in a better position than I am. Northern France is great.
Yes, indeed. Why don't we jump right in?
Great. Let's go.
Okay. Probably for the first time, it's kind of strange to say that nothing is news, but the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady today. And the question always comes up, when to lock into a fixed rate, when to stay variable. Obviously, permanent financing derives a lot of its rate from the 10-year Treasury bill as opposed to the short-term interest rate. What's your perspective on when to lock into a long-term rate?
Well, my general feeling is that it's good to lock into a long-term rate. It depends on the amount of financing that you have or what have you. But I would say to lock in with a long-term rate, but also get the right to prepay. If you got the right to prepay, if the rates go down, you pay off, even if you have to pay a penalty. But then you got the right at that point to go. So if there's a substantial decrease in the rate, you can take advantage of it, even though you can lock in long term. My motto has always been borrow as much as you can for as long as you can. And it usually works out very well. That's what I totally suggest. If you have locked in the rate, but you have a right to prepay, if rates go down, you refinance and you're on top of it. If rates go up, you're locked in. You don't have to worry about refinancing your loan at a time when the refinancing might not be feasible or might be very expensive. That's my philosophy anyway.
I mean, often a variable rate loan typically does not have a prepayment penalty associated with it. It's more of an open type loan. And so
I'm saying it. I'm talking about I'm not talking. I've never been a fan of variable rates. Never. They just the amount that you save by having the very variable rate can be wiped out in the event you have all of a sudden you have a tremendous rise, or it's just that the lenders at this point are looking for bigger returns. So the variable rates I've never found them very attractive for any financing which I've done. I much like to have a fixed term, and then you can thumb your nose at it changes when it goes up.
That makes sense.
Well, but for me anyway. That was my philosophy. And if you're not, the variable rates work best if in fact you're talking with a substantial amount of financing. Because then the rate could be, you're talking about dropping a half a point or a quarter of a point or whatever, could be a big saving of money. But in the average loan or the average investor, which I've met during the course of my career, it's not worth the difference.
Right.
The spec is not. If you're talking in millions of a very heavy loan. Yeah, a half a point can make a big difference. If you're talking 100,000, 300,000, a million, it doesn't make a big difference.
Well, George, we have a friend who we spoke about last month. Now, he's got an issue he's dealing with where he has several loans that have prepayment penalties associated with them.
He has a buyer for a number of his assets, but that would potentially trigger payment of a prepayment penalty. Are there any scenarios where you have seen lenders waive that or been able to negotiate out of those types of prepayment penalties?
On occasion, that's a good question. Generally they would, they don't like to waive anything. Banks don't like to give up anything that they have. But they are also subject to, you can negotiate with banks. Doesn't mean the fact that you've got it or not. The bank may not be interested in your loan, or your property. Banks generally are interested in one thing: getting their money back. That's what there is. They're not interested in aggravation. So if a lender basically decides he's going to give him a little aggravation, it may give him the leverage that he needs in order to talk to the bank. So there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, my business is bad, things are going down, everything's going downhill, blah, 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 blah. You may end up foreclosing the property. Banks don't like to hear that. Even if it's not, they don't want to have a non-performing loan on their books because they have to account for it when they file their returns with the government. And also, it's also a fact that foreclosing property takes a long period of time in most jurisdictions. So if you got a bank and you say, fine, you want to foreclose the property, good, you can foreclose, but I'll see you in 3 years. And in the 3 years, you've got the right to pay them off. So there's a lot of leverage there. It's a question of whether you want to do it. But I don't like the philosophy that you got to do exactly what the bank says.
Because in reality, we're often, conditioned to think that the bank holds all the negotiating leverage, that they hold all the cards, right?
Absolutely. That's the fallacy. You hit it right on the head. Everybody thinks, well, I can't negotiate with the bank. The bank at this point, they'll foreclose, they'll take my property, I'll lose my equity, and I've got to do what they say. And if I have an opportunity to do it, and they want to get a prepayment penalty, yeah, I'm ready to do that because I want to make the loan, and I don't care if they got a prepayment penalty. You can't negotiate with them. That's nonsense. I've negotiated many times with banks, and you'd be surprised on the philosophy that they have. They want to get their money back. It depends at the time when you're doing the renegotiation. What's the market? What's the property? What's involved? Is there money? Is it great so that they've got a great loan, or is that it's not such a great loan? Generally speaking, they don't like to be involved. They don't want to own the property. They don't want to. They just want to know that they're not going to have a problem. Once you give them a problem and you indicate what it is, even if it's not totally factually correct, that you're saying, hey, the truth is I don't have the financing to meet the mortgage. I got all kinds of expenses on my property. I've got repairs. I've got all kinds of. So I need help. Once the bank knows they may have a problem on their hands in getting involved in the operation, they don't like that. So they may say, the truth is it's better for us. I'd rather get paid and waive my prepayment penalty than to have all kinds of problems if I'm forced into a foreclosure. They do not want to own the property, and you can use that as a good leverage, a good lever, and it works. It works, but you always think that they have the upper hand. Most instances they don't. And
so you're really, what you're saying is you're really not committing financial suicide by telling them you've got a problem.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You have to understand that the banks they must report periodically to the government, whether the state or to the federal government, their status, their balance sheet. The one thing they don't want on a balance sheet is a non-performing loan. Because once you have a non-performing loan, which you're carrying on your balance sheet, you have to justify the amount of the loan, which means you have to look at other properties, you have to look at all other things. They don't like to do that, to get penalized for having to report a non-conforming loan. And that also isn't. So instead of saying, hey, here's what I've got, here's the payments, the interest and amortization on that loan, which I now have as a performing loan, all of a sudden the pipeline is cut. I don't have that anymore. So now they've got to change their financial statement because they've lost some income. So nothing wrong with that at all. It's great that you're using the leverage that you have with the bank. Also, you should be aware that the average banker that you have, or the one who's ever supervising your loan, is a low-level person. It's not somebody high in the bank. Once you stop paying or you make issues, it goes out of this low-level person and it goes up the ladder. Depending on how much you're talking about, it'll get to some level with somebody that has the authority to see how important this is to the bank or the relationship. So I don't, to me at this point, I wouldn't I wouldn't never hesitated at this point to to get tough with the bank, even to the extent that it's not really true. I mean, you don't have to justify it. You don't have to go forward and say, we got all these repairs, we got all of this, I've lost tenants or whatever. You can find all of the things that you can come up with, which would indicate that the loan that they have is not as good as they think it is. And I wouldn't tell them certainly to prepay because I've got a buyer and I'm making a pot full of money. That's the last thing I would do.
Got it. I love it. That's great advice. Great advice, George.
Yeah. And I mean, I would basically sit down with a banker and you plead poverty or plead whatever it is. It doesn't have to be true. They don't know it. In other words, these are bankers. If they were smart people, they wouldn't be bankers. They would be doing the investing, but they don't do that. So they're only looking at one thing: make the loan, see if the loan to value is good, and then see that nothing happens. I'm not criticized for the fact that I made this loan or I'm carrying the loan.
Right.
They don't like that.
I love George's perspective. Borrow as much as you can for as long as you can, and stay away from prepayment penalties. Lock into interest rates where you have certainty over your interest rate future. As you think about that, maybe you might want to consider locking in your interest rates, getting out of variable interest rates for your projects. Have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.